A New Jersey-based call center is at the nexus of a controversial story about the former New York City mayor turned presidential candidate Michael Bloomberg. There are allegations that prison labor was used to make calls on behalf of the Bloomberg campaign, and the question is whether or not he knew about it.
Joining us now to talk about his reporting is Intercept Contributor John Washington. I'm the D.C. Bureau Chief for the Intercept. I'm very proud that I was able to have a small role in this, and I'm pleased to welcome John to the show here.
Thanks for having me on.
Good to see you, John. So give us a breakdown a little bit of the story. I think it's a little bit convoluted, but actually quite simple, right? So it's like there was a contract put out for foreign prison labor, or prison labor was used to possibly help the Bloomberg campaign. The question is whether he knew about it or not. Is that where we stand?
Right. So the Bloomberg campaign was contracting at least one third-party vendor that was then contracting a call center company based out of New Jersey. They have a bunch of different call centers in New Jersey and in Oklahoma, and two of the call centers in Oklahoma are run out of prisons. In at least one of those prisons, it's a women's facility, about 900 inmates. They were making calls for the Bloomberg campaign. They had to sign off. This call was paid for by Mike Bloomberg 2020 or something about thereabout. And then we know that the calls were made in exactly that prison. They may have been made in the other one as well. And the question you asked is, did the Bloomberg campaign know about it? When I talked to the call center company, Procom, they told me that both they and their vendors make very clear that they work with inmates. There's a question about if some companies want to be doing that or not. And they absolutely know. The third-party vendor knew. And what I don't know is if Bloomberg knew before I called the campaign and asked about it. Subsequent to the article, they said that there's actually a fourth party involved, that there was two sort of middlemen, like subcontractors. But they also, at first, both the Procom, the company, and the Bloomberg campaign denied that this was happening. And neither of them so far have given me the actual names of those third-party vendors or the subcontractors. So I can't conclude that there was a fourth, but there was at least some middleman working between them.
You write a little bit in the piece about the wages that were filtering down to these women. Can you talk about how much the campaign was paying and how much these women were getting paid for these calls?
Right. There's still a little bit of unclarity on that. So I know that Procom was paying the Oklahoma Department of Corrections the federal and state minimum wage, $7.25 an hour. Then the DOC pays the women themselves. And there's a number of different types of contracts that are used for prison labor, and this one seems to be an exception. So CBS actually did some follow-up reporting and got a statement out of Oklahoma DOC saying that these women were earning about $1.45 an hour. That is significantly higher than most people make while working in prison. The average state prison wage currently is about 20 cents an hour. And outside of this sort of special contract, Oklahoma caps wages for inmates at about a little bit more than $27 a month. Mm-hmm. So these people were making more, but again, $1.45 is very insignificant.
Right. So, John, I mean, I think what this really highlights, it's not just the Bloomberg campaign. It's about the kind of the intersection in the way that prison labor can be used in these types of environments. So what have you learned through reporting on this process about how these inmates can be put to use? And you say here, you said the average, I think, was the Oklahoma Department of Corrections getting paid $7.25 an hour. And so they're basically taking almost a $6 per hour cut per worker and making quite a bit of money, I assume, off of this. And this is not a private prison per se. So just talk about that in particular, how these state prisons are profiting off of inmate labor.
Well, I don't know if the state prison itself is profiting, but they're saving money. And they save money through different types of prison labor, doing like the basic maintenance and custodial work. There's a lot of different types of prison labor. There's a couple different federal industries, and there's statewide industries, and there's private companies. Here, as far as I've been told, and it seems to be correct, that these jobs were coveted, and they were a lot better than some of the other industry jobs you can get in prison. And they did sometimes lead to jobs in call centers outside of prisons. That said, I think, and this is something that a lot of critics point out, is that the nature of prison work is fundamentally coercive. There is no real choice that these women have, or whoever is doing this, any type of labor in prison. Not only are the wages so low, it's often the only option that they have. Oftentimes, there will be actually recriminations if you don't work in a certain industry. You can be sent to the SHU, or the special housing unit, the whole solitary confinement, if you don't do work. And in some states, and this is getting further away from the work that was being done for the Bloomberg campaign, people are paid nothing, absolutely nothing, and they are forced to work. They're forced to work in the fields, and it is something that very much resembles old-time slavery that has happened. Again, this was not the case here, but I think that there's a continuum of work. All of it is something that is people are coerced into doing, and the conditions, though, are better in some instances and worse in others. They are not great in any of them. And these women, I think it's worth remembering that they can't vote. I would question whether or not they would want to vote for Bloomberg. They would want to be making these calls for Bloomberg, and forced to make campaign calls for someone that you wouldn't vote for and you can't vote for, I think highlights some of that coercive nature of prison.
Great point.
Right, and it also shows that the system is so wretched and evil that those jobs are coveted. So you have a horrendous system that people are living through. Yet at the same time, if I were there, and the options being presented to me were the ones that are, I'd be like, you know what? Yeah, actually, let me do the phone calls. It gets you on the phone. It gets you talking to people who are outside of prison. It gets you something to fill up your day. So I can understand why people who are in that awful situation would want to do that job. It's obscene that they're only paid $1 something an hour for it. And it's obscene that is counted as a kind of top 1% of prison workers. But how have you kind of engaged with the criticism of the piece that it actually shouldn't have existed, period, because it stigmatizes prison labor?
So, do you mean the fact that I'm calling out that
Right.
Bloomberg was using this campaign? Yeah. Well, there has been criticism of it, and a lot of people have said, well, this is a good thing to give people work, and I think, and I agree. I think relatively, and this is what you were just saying, relatively, it's better to give people work than to keep them locked up in a cell for 24/7. And yet, there are fundamental problems with our prison system that go far afield from just the way that people work, and that these need to be addressed. We need to know that, like, giving people better options in prison isn't a way to reduce rampant mass incarceration. We need to understand that while a candidate, in this case, again, Bloomberg, is putting out a series of proposals about criminal justice reform, that like reducing the amount of people in prison and giving them jobs on the outside, or giving them jobs on the outside before they would have to go into prison, is a much better fix, a much more responsible fix to this. Bloomberg himself did actually reduce the total prison population in New York when he was a mayor. But he also, as we know, like what his biggest legacy is, well, one of his legacies as mayor of New York is for the stop and frisk. And there it was overwhelmingly targeting Black and Latino people. And there's over 4 million people who were stopped. And that disparity of who was stopped during stop and frisk is mirrored exactly in the prisons. So though we can put some window dressing on it and give some people some basic skills about the actual labor that happens in prison, and that all is good and is an important step towards reducing the horror that these people live through, really we need to have a bigger conversation about it and talk about why there's so many people locked up and why they're so often Black or brown.
It's a very, very interesting piece, and I think it tells a broader story. John, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on.
Coming up, it's still a two-person race between Senator Bernie Sanders and former Vice President Joe Biden.
Team Rising weighs in on why those two have maintained the top positions as other campaigns have collapsed. Next.